All right, so you guys sent in a ton of stuff on Justin Trudeau resigning, and it's clear you want to go deeper than just the headlines on this one. So we are going to do a deep dive into what these sources tell us about his time as prime minister and what might be next for Canada.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here for sure.
Yeah, we've got a real mix, news articles, opinion pieces, even some economic reports.
Wow, looks like you really want to get to the bottom of why Trudeau stepped down.
Yeah, after nearly a decade as prime minister, it's a big deal.
Big shift in Canadian politics.
Huge. Well, let's start back in 2015. Remember that energy when Trudeau first won?
Oh yeah, is electric.
I mean, son of a political icon, promising real change. Remember all those selfies?
Yeah, all those sunny selfies, sunny ways, right?
The sunny ways, that's what he called it.
I think it's important to remember that early optimism, it helps us understand how jarring this fall from grace feels to a lot of people.
Yeah, it's quite a contrast to how things are now.
Definitely. And, those early years did see some real achievements. Gender-balanced cabinet, something we hadn't seen in Canada before that.
Right, the legalization of cannabis.
And don't forget the Canada Child Benefit Program.
Yeah, that had a real impact on people's lives.
Absolutely. These weren't just symbolic gestures. They had real effects.
Totally. And of course, welcoming Syrian refugees. It felt like Canada was taking a stand.
Right, like stepping onto the world stage, being a beacon for progressive values.
And it's interesting how Trudeau's early popularity, it kind of came at a time when progressive leaders were kind of ascendant globally.
Yeah, you're right. It was part of a larger global context.
But as the political winds shifted, he seemed to struggle to keep that momentum going.
For sure. And, take the SNC-Lavalin affair, for example.
Ooh, yeah, that was a big one.
This wasn't just another scandal. It really hit at the heart of Trudeau's brand.
Totally. I mean, it raised questions about his commitment to the rule of law, whether those sunny ways were hiding something else.
Right. And for those who don't know, this involved allegations that Trudeau and his office pressured the justice minister to intervene in a corruption case.
Against this huge engineering firm.
Exactly. And it was potentially to protect jobs.
Which really hurt Trudeau's image, especially among those who initially, saw him as this champion of ethics and transparency.
Yeah, it was a tough blow.
And then came the WE charity scandal.
Oh, yeah, that one too.
Where his family's ties to the organization raised all these conflict of interest questions.
And eroded even more public trust, it seemed like the scandals kept coming.
One after another, just chipping away at his carefully crafted image.
And what's striking is the pattern that emerges from these controversies,
What do you mean?
Well, Trudeau often seemed to prioritize political survival over actually sticking to his principles.
Oh, interesting.
And that made even some of his early supporters start to question his authenticity.
Like that Al Jazeera opinion piece you sent, it was brutal.
Oh, yeah, that one's powerful.
It starts with good riddance, Justin Trudeau, and goes on to call him, get this, a progressive fraud.
Wow, talk about a change in perspective.
That's one way to put it.
It accuses him of hypocrisy on a whole range of issues, from feminism to climate change.
Yeah, like even though he called himself a feminist, he faced criticism for how he handled sexual misconduct allegations within the military. And then there's him firing two prominent female cabinet ministers who, challenged him.
Exactly. The image he projected and what he actually did were clashing.
Big time. And that disconnect was especially apparent with his climate policy.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like, I don't know. On the one hand, he signed the Paris Agreement, making all these promises about climate action. But then on the other hand, he approved that controversial Trans Mountain pipeline expansion.
Which just angered environmentalists and indigenous communities.
I mean, how do we make sense of those actions? They seem contradictory.
Well, it really highlights the tension that's inherent in climate policy, not just in Canada, but everywhere. How do you balance these ambitious environmental goals with the economic reality of a country that relies heavily on resource extraction,
That's a tough one.
It is, and Trudeau tried to walk a fine line, appealing to his progressive base while also trying to please powerful industries.
It's like a tightrope walk, and I think a lot of people feel he fell short on both sides.
It's a delicate balancing act for sure.
So we're starting to see how Trudeau's political capital dwindled over time. Scandals hurt his credibility, while his actions on climate change alienated supporters and critics alike.
It's a complex picture.
But there's another piece of this puzzle that we need to look at, the housing crisis. I mean, it's reached a boiling point in Canada, and many people blame Trudeau's policies.
Yeah, that's become a major point of contention.
It's like his ambitious immigration targets, while initially popular, They kind of backfired when paired with a lack of affordable housing.
You've hit on a crucial point there.
It's not just that housing prices have gone through the roof, it's that the government didn't seem to be doing enough to address it.
Yeah, it tapped into a broader anxiety about economic inequality.
Right, like the Canadian dream of homeownership is slipping away for many.
Especially for younger generations.
Yeah, the sources we have point to growing resentment among millennials and Gen Z. They're struggling to afford rent, let alone buying a home.
It created this feeling that Trudeau's policies were helping newcomers, but leaving those born and raised in Canada behind.
It's interesting how this connects to global trends.
Yeah, we're seeing this in other Western democracies too.
Right.
Economic anxieties fueling resentment towards immigration. And contributing to political polarization, it's a pattern.
So we've got these scandals hurting Trudeau's image, his climate policy leaving many dissatisfied, and the housing crisis fueling economic anxiety.
Yeah, it's starting to feel like a perfect storm brewing.
It really does. But what was the final straw?
Yeah.
What ultimately pushed Trudeau to resign?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. The sources we have suggest it wasn't one single thing that made him resign. It was more like a bunch of pressures building up all at the same time.
Both from inside and outside his party.
Inside and out.
Like his approval ratings.
They've been going down for a while.
And there were rumors about people in his own party.
The Liberal Party, yeah.
Not being happy with him anymore.
Dissenting voices.
Dissenting voices, right?
And of course, the other parties could sense this. They were like sharks circling, just waiting for him to slip up.
So a vote of no confidence was looking more and more likely.
Yeah, it was definitely a possibility.
And then, remember, this happened right when another huge political thing went down. His finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, she resigned too.
Oh yeah, just a few weeks before Trudeau.
That was a total shock, especially because
they were close.
They were so close, and Freeland was such a powerful figure.
A real force in the government.
So her leaving,
yeah,
it was a sign that things were really bad.
Deeply amiss.
Deeply amiss, yeah.
And her resignation letter, it's very carefully worded.
Diplomatic.
Very diplomatic, but you can kind of read between the lines. And it hints at a big disagreement about how to handle the economy.
How so?
She emphasized needing to be careful with spending.
Fiscal prudence, right.
Exactly. She even said, I believe that it is now essential for Canada to keep its fiscal powder dry.
Which basically means she felt Trudeau's government was being reckless.
Especially with all the economic problems looming on the horizon.
Soaring inflation, the national debt keeps growing, and the housing market is just out of reach for so many people.
Yeah, Trudeau is leaving behind some serious challenges.
He is, and now all eyes are on Pierre Poilievre,
leader of the Conservative Party,
who seems pretty much guaranteed to be the next prime minister.
It's looking that way.
The big question is, what kind of leader will he be?
Well, that's the million-dollar question.
It is. Poilievre's a tricky figure to understand. You can't just label him as a fiscal conservative and call it a day.
Right. He's more than that.
He's got charisma.
He's a populist, for sure.
A populist who's connected with people who feel like the system's failed them.
The forgotten, the left behind.
Exactly. He's promising tax cuts, less government bureaucracy.
Unleashing the free market.
He even went after the Bank of Canada.
Blaming them for inflation?
That's a bold move.
It is. It shows he's not afraid to shake things up.
Some people are even comparing him to Trump.
Oh, yeah, the Trump comparison.
Because they both appeal to the same kind of populist anger.
The anti-establishment sentiment.
And they both use that fiery rhetoric.
Give power back to the people, that kind of talk.
Right, drain the swamp, fight the elites.
But it's important to remember that comparisons can only go so far.
We can't oversimplify things.
Exactly. Poilievre might tap into that same anger.
But his actual policy ideas, at least when it comes to the economy,
they seem more like classic conservative stuff.
Smaller government, lower taxes.
Free enterprise.
Right, which is a pretty big shift from Trudeau's approach.
Definitely. Trudeau was more hands-on, more interventionist.
And one area where they'll probably clash is climate policy.
Oh, for sure.
Trudeau, even with all his contradictions, at least talked about the environment.
He made it part of his platform.
Poilievre is way more skeptical.
He's questioned the science behind climate change.
And he hates carbon taxes.
Absolutely hates them.
Which reflects a bigger trend we're seeing with conservatives around the world.
It's not just a Canadian thing.
Right. He frames it as a choice between growing the economy or protecting the environment.
As if you can't do both.
Right. He says carbon taxes will kill jobs without actually helping the planet.
Which is a debatable point.
It is, and his critics say that view is short-sighted.
That he's putting the fossil fuel industry ahead of everything else.
And ignoring the long-term consequences.
Like extreme weather and rising sea levels.
Yeah, those are real economic costs, too.
They are, but Poilievre's supporters see him as a voice of reason.
Someone who's not falling for the climate alarmist hype.
Protecting Canadian jobs, that's their priority.
So it's a divisive issue, no doubt about it.
Extremely divisive.
And it'll be interesting to see how Poilievre handles it as prime minister.
That's going to be a big test for him.
And his stance on social issues.
Like LGBTQ+ rights, abortion.
Those are likely to cause controversy, too.
He said he supports LGBTQ+ rights.
But he's also aligned himself with social conservatives.
Who have very different views.
Which shows the tension within the Conservative Party itself.
It's a coalition of different groups.
Fiscal conservatives, social conservatives, libertarians.
All with their own ideas about things like abortion, same-sex marriage, drug policy.
So how Poilievre manages those internal disagreements will be crucial.
He's going to have to walk a tightrope.
Especially in Canada's increasingly polarized political climate.
It's a tough environment to navigate.
And speaking of political climates, we can't forget about the U.S.
The elephant in the room.
Trudeau, despite everything, managed to keep things pretty stable with the U.S.
Even during the Trump years.
But now, with a president who's more ideologically aligned with Poilievre,
things could get interesting.
It's tempting to think they'll be best buds.
Two peas in a pod.
Right, both conservatives, but international relations are never that simple.
There are always points of friction.
Especially on trade and economics.
Remember those trade wars during Trump's first term?
Canadian industries got hit hard.
And those tensions could easily flare up again.
Especially if Poilievre starts putting Canada first.
For a more protectionist stance.
And then there's the wild card factor.
Both Poilievre and the president are known for being
unpredictable
and kind of combative.
So even if they try to be diplomatic,
a clash of personalities could throw everything off.
It really could. So it seems like Canada's heading into uncertain times.
On multiple fronts.
A new prime minister with a completely different agenda, a potentially shaky relationship with the U.S., and a whole bunch of problems at home.
The economy, climate change, social divisions.
What does all this mean for everyday Canadians?
Well, for the average person, these changes are going to have real effects.
On their lives.
Yeah, if Poilievre follows through on his plans.
There could be changes to taxes, government services.
The cost of living could go up or down.
His approach to social issues could impact healthcare, education, social safety nets.
And how he handles the U.S. could affect trade, jobs, the whole economy.
It's a lot to take in.
It can be overwhelming, for sure.
But that's why we do these deep dives.
To help make sense of it all.
To cut through the noise, provide some context and analysis.
To empower you guys, the listeners, to understand what's happening.
This complex and ever-changing political landscape.
It's about understanding the forces at work.
The potential consequences of different policies.
And how these decisions will shape Canada's future.
And remember, your voice matters.
More than ever.
Stay informed, participate in the political process.
Hold your elected officials accountable.
Now let's focus on one of the most interesting questions about Trudeau leaving.
Okay, what's that?
Does his resignation give Canada a chance to reset?
To move past all the polarization and division we've seen lately?
So it feels like we've really been digging into this like a puzzle, looking at all the different parts of Trudeau's time as prime minister. And now we're left with this big question about what's next for Canada. Does Trudeau stepping down, after all the political fighting we've seen, does it give Canada a chance to kind of hit the reset button?
That's a really interesting question. And the answer, well, it's complicated.
Yeah, it's not a simple yes or no.
Not at all. For a lot of people, Trudeau became a symbol of all the division in Canadian politics.
Like you either loved him or you hated him.
Exactly, and his resignation takes away that immediate focus.
That lightning rod.
But it doesn't mean the underlying tensions that created that division are just gone.
Right, those deeper issues are still there.
Absolutely. They're rooted in things like economic inequality, differences between regions, the anxieties people feel about globalization and technology changing so fast.
And social media hasn't helped.
Oh, social media has definitely made things worse.
It's like it's amplified those anxieties and created these echo chambers.
Yeah, where people only see information that agrees with what they already think.
Which makes it almost impossible to have a real conversation, where you actually listen to different viewpoints.
Exactly. It's all about shouting your own opinion as loud as you can.
Without really trying to understand where the other side is coming from.
And that makes the challenge even bigger for any leader who wants to bring people together. It's not just about saying the right things. It's about changing how we talk to each other.
Yeah, like we've forgotten how to disagree without being nasty about it.
We need to be willing to listen, to see things from other people's perspectives.
Even if we don't agree with them.
Exactly, and remember that even people we disagree with are still our fellow citizens.
We're all Canadians.
We all want what's best for this country, even if we have different ideas about how to get there.
Which brings us to Pierre Poilievre, who's probably going to be the next prime minister. Can he be that unifying figure, the one who brings Canadians together?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
It is, because he's built his career on being pretty confrontational.
Yeah, his rhetoric has been very sharp, very divisive at times.
He's appealed to people who feel ignored by the elites, the establishment.
So can he switch from that style to one that's more about building bridges and bringing people together?
It seems like a tough transition.
It does, but you never know. Maybe being prime minister will change him.
Maybe the weight of that responsibility will have a moderating effect.
It's happened before. Politicians evolve when they get into power.
They have to get things done.
They need to build consensus, work with people who disagree with them.
And Poilievre's a smart guy. He knows that to be a successful prime minister.
Yeah.
He can't just appeal to his base. He needs to reach out to a broader range of Canadians.
So it'll be interesting to see if he can do that.
If he can balance his own beliefs with the need to govern a diverse country.
It's a delicate balance.
It's going to be fascinating to watch it all unfold.
Absolutely.
And for you guys listening, this is where you come in.
It's time to get involved, to be more than just passive observers.
Hold your elected officials accountable. Have those tough conversations.
Demand better from your leaders.
And remember, you can make a difference in your own way, too.
Be the change you want to see.
Listen to people who think differently than you.
Find common ground.
Remind everyone that even though we might disagree,
We're all in this together.
we're all Canadians, and we have a shared responsibility to build a better future for this country.
So even though Justin Trudeau leaving marks the end of an era,
It's also a new beginning, a chance to reflect on what we've learned.
to rethink our priorities, and to commit ourselves to creating a Canada that's truly for everyone.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Into Justin Trudeau's resignation.
We've looked at the ups and downs of his time as Prime Minister, the challenges Canada's facing, and the possibility of a fresh start in our political conversations.
And hopefully this has given you a better understanding of this important moment in Canadian history.
And inspired you to get more involved in the issues that shape your world.
Remember, a strong democracy needs informed and engaged citizens.
So stay curious, keep asking questions, and keep exploring the world around you.
And until next time, keep diving deep.
See you guys.